If you've been following my YouTube channel, you'll know that I often advise you to try to read your interviewer's actual goals in a job interview, both in the phone, but more specifically during the on-site interview. Because, so to be clear, an employer, especially for a high-performing role, they have a very good idea on the types of candidates they're looking for. And this is oftentimes quite counterintuitive, maybe more so during a phone interview. And while listening to an audiobook, it's actually Mark's and Adela's Ladders interview guide, I found a very interesting piece of advice. Like, what if instead of, or I should say, what if besides you listening to what the interviewer is actually asking you, what if you ask them in the beginning of the interview or even prior to the interview, what are the 3 most important elements when it comes to the successful candidate for this role? And I know it sounds easier than it actually is to, start the conversation by asking the interviewer this question, but I'm pretty confident that many of you have a couple of touch points going into the job interview. Or even if the interview had only just begun, maybe you have a certain opening for asking for this type of information, and it is a very important information that you would want to know, because if you know what the interviewer is looking for, first and foremost if you're the right type of candidate that they're looking for this role. And even further, you could even polish your communication style and focus that you communicate the ideas that you want to transmit the most during a job interview. And I would even go as far as, for example, during an on-site interview, to simply try to ask each of those separate interviewers, if you're interviewing with multiple people, hey, what do you think makes the best candidate for this role? And so to be clear, I'm not telling you to ask this at the end of the interview. You could as well, ask this at the end of your first interview and then use that information for the subsequent interviews. But ideally, you should know this in advance. And yes, I have, throughout time, I have learned that the best possible candidates are the candidates that know very well how to listen during a job interview, are not necessarily the ones that prepare the most or do certain other aspects. So if you go to a job interview, try as much as possible to find what is the profile of the ideal candidate in their profile, and who knows, maybe you will reach out to a junior HR person who will spill the beans with this information. So needless to say, this is super important, and I believe it's a worthwhile mentioning trick that anyone should take seriously going into a job interview.